Back in the mid-80s, I was working down at Hanscom Air Force Base at the Air Force Research Lab and was looking for a place up north to use as a second home. And I couldn't afford places in Sunapee or New London, and I was shown at a property here in Springfield, and both my wife and I liked it very much, and we decided this will be a good second home. And then after I retired, it evolved into a primary residence, and we've been here full-time since 2005. As I say, we were here in 1987 as part-time residents through that previous period. I graduated from an engineering school in New Jersey with a bachelor's degree in chemical engineering and a commission as a second lieutenant in the Air Force through ROTC. And at the time, the Air Force had no need for chemical engineers, but because of the buildup in the Vietnam War, they desperately needed meteorologists. So there's a lot of commonality between chemical engineering and meteorology. So I was sent to Penn State to take a year's course in meteorology and wound up with a second bachelor's degree, and then was assigned to the most improbable place I ever could imagine, Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri. I spent the next 3 years supporting the Army. The Air Force supports the Army with meteorological services. The Army has very, very little in that capability. And it was during the Vietnam buildup, and unfortunately, many of my acquaintances went to Vietnam. Some didn't come back, some did. Some came back in bad shape. It was an eye-opening experience to look at another service from the point of view of all the training I had was Air Force training, and you get thrown into this environment, and it's a basic training. 40,000 basic training recruits are there at Leonard Wood, and they have another side effect, the 921st Combat Engineers, which they teach how to run road graders and all that heavy equipment so that they can build airfields and things like that. It was an eye-opening experience. Well, this was right in the middle of the 60s when space was becoming the next frontier for the military. And I received a notice one day, just before I was getting ready to be reassigned, that the Air Force was looking for people who might be interested in going to learn about interplanetary space. So I had a fairly good academic record. I applied and was accepted, and I was sent to the University of Colorado at Boulder and wound up getting a master's degree in astrogeophysics, which is the study of the sun, interplanetary space, and its effects on the near-Earth environment, especially satellite altitudes. Once I left Boulder, I was reassigned to the Air Force Cambridge Research Laboratories at Hanscom Air Force Base as a solar physicist. Now, my experience in the military is so far from most people's. I never flew a plane, I never captained a ship, I never did any of that stuff. I was essentially a researcher. And part of my job with another group was to find ways to try to forecast solar activity and then its occurring effects on the Earth. We've all seen the aurora this summer due to those kinds of mass ejections from the sun. It became apparent we were doing some pretty crude work. I mean, this was basic stuff. What we were doing was using optical measurements of the sun, sunspots, solar flares, prominences, filaments, all those things, to try to find out what triggers the activity and what's the magnitude and how can it affect the Earth. Well, we quickly found out that the data that we were using had so much noise in it because the Air Force didn't have its own observing capability. It was using civilian observatories around the world. In Greece, the Canary Islands, Australia, Hawaii, California. And none of these telescopes were common with any other ones. Some of them used advanced electronics to capture the image and evaluate it. Others used refracting telescopes, which was the old Galileo type, and they would project an image on something called a Stonyhurst disk and trace out the sunspots. So here we're dealing with mechanical drawings and electronics, and there was no way that we could keep things together. So one of our goals was, let's try to develop two matched solar telescopes that will produce the same image of the same sun at the same time. After 2 years working with the Navy in San Diego, we produced two solar telescopes that had remarkably similar images. That became the basis of an observational network that the Air Force adopted, the Solar Optical Observation Network, where they put these kinds of telescopes at locations around the world so that the sun could be monitored at all times. And that produced a set of data that was more homogeneous and began to produce some results. At the time, I was a captain, and I was taking one course a semester at MIT towards a PhD. And I came up for reassignment. And I knew that if I was reassigned, I'd never finish the degree, because I was probably going to go to Washington or someplace like that. So in a tough decision, I decided to separate from the Air Force after 10 years and 2 months on active duty. I did finish the degree, ultimately went back to work at the same research lab, worked my way up to become chief scientist, retired, and moved up to Springfield. And that's sort of, in a nutshell, is my military experience. And as you'll see, people ask me, why did the Air Force put you in uniform? Why couldn't they just hire you as a civilian? Well, the answer is that they needed to have a basis of understanding in the officer corps to make the decisions necessary to decide on how to treat satellites in this terribly hostile environment. Policy, there were very few of us who had hands-on experience. I was one of the fortunate ones. Most people in that field these days are in management. They're making bigger decisions, which is important, but you need a basic understanding of the environment you're dealing with, and that's why they developed this very small core of people with this kind of background. There was only 2 places in the United States in the 60s that had this kind of instruction. One was the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor, and the other was the University of Colorado in Boulder. And it was, I was just extremely fortunate to get that assignment because it opened many, many doors for me, and I just was shocked at how interesting it was, how much influence you could have, because it was a brand new field. Hardly anybody was doing what we were trying to do. I mean, there were other people doing research, but it didn't have the emphasis on military systems in space that we were trying to do. So it was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, and I was glad to have had it. Even though I never piloted a plane, drove a ship, or fired a gun at anybody, it was still a contribution that I was honored to have done. And I wish we had more young folks who were inclined to go into the military these days, because we need technically trained people, because the military is getting to be so technically oriented. In my own case, my granddaughter is a second lieutenant out at Peterson Air Force Base out in Colorado, and she is the kind of person that fits in perfectly with the needs of today's modern Air Force, modern military, not only the Air Force, but I was proud to serve. My military experience is so different than normal. I came out of school, did 3 years active duty in the field that I was trained for. And then when this other opportunity came along, I needed another degree. I needed to go back to school. I needed to study. And I was fortunate to get assigned to a place where I could use the training, assemble data, analyze it, and hopefully apply it towards the goal, the objective we were trying to achieve. Along the way, we had to make some of our own instrumentation, which fortunately worked out. But from a point of view of comparing my military experience with the average military officer, there really is no comparison, because it was just such a different set of assignments, different goals, different objectives, different education requirements, and I can't say that I had a bad time. I enjoyed every minute of it. It turns out I was just in the right place at the right time. The buildup of space assets pointed to the need within the military of more education for their officer corps and their senior enlisted corps. As I mentioned, I went to school several times that the Air Force provided, and there was increasing awareness of the need for more highly educated people to lead the Air Force and the military into the 21st century, where we are now. And I think that the need is there. The need will be growing all the time, because the military, as you can see from current events, is becoming more and more and more technical. And we need people trained to be able to use those advanced military systems, which are becoming increasingly more expensive, and we need to have people who can use them effectively. I would like to include one short story that has nothing to do with the duties that I had while I was in the military, but it shows how the military takes care of its own. When I was at Fort Leonard Wood, when I was a duty forecaster, 24 hours a day, you get a telephone call if there was severe weather, or if there was something that the observer on duty felt that he needed a forecaster to make a decision. So I was no stranger to getting phone calls at 2, 3, 4 in the morning. One night, the phone rings, 3 o'clock. I answer it. The voice at the other end says, "Lieutenant Hendel?" I said, "Yes." "Thank God," he says. We had a report of an Air Force lieutenant killed on Route 66, and nobody in the military police wanted to call you because they feared it was you. And that, to me, here we have people from different services looking out for one another, being concerned that one of their fellows in a different service might have been killed on the highway. And, you know, the military police have a hell of a job. It's almost like, it's worse in many respects than a civilian policeman. But these guys, the emotion that they had, nobody wanted to call. Even the commander said, "No, you call." And that was very gratifying to me. I felt that everybody had your back.